Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce the moderator, Nicholas Leiserson, Senior Vice President for Policy, Institute for Security and Technology. And this session is the Cyber House Rules, Perspectives on the 2026 Congressional Agenda.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Leiserson. I am the Senior Vice President for Policy at the Institute for Security and Technology, which is a Bay Area think tank focused on uniting technologists and policymakers on issues where national security and technology policy intersect. We are going to be talking today about the congressional agenda, what life looks like in Congress. I have 3 live congressional staffers on stage to talk about both what's going on right now and how that's being received in Congress and some of the longer term projects that they're working on. We're very grateful that they're here. A little bit about what I hope you all get away from this. We're going to try and be as lively as we can at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch and after a day of panels and with a lot more stuff to come this evening, I'm sure. But one of the things, I worked on the Hill for 12 years before I then worked at the Office of the National Cyber Director, and then I'm now at a think tank. And one of the things that was really important to me the whole time I was working for a member, Congressman Jim Langevin, one of the leaders of cybersecurity, was the fact that people, when I got out of DC and talked to folks, people tended to look at me and I'd say, hey, I'm from Congress, and they'd say, but Nick, you seem like a pretty reasonable guy. And I'd be like, yeah, but actually that's what it's like. But it's really important, I think, for folks in the community to have an understanding of what it's like to be a staffer, what it's like to work on some of the issues that end up impacting all of the work that you do every day, and also to help drag them across the country so that they can come and hear from perspectives that they won't necessarily get in DC. So we have a great panel here arrayed before us. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves quickly with a little bit of background about where they came from, because the stories of how you become a congressional staffer are varied and fascinating. And then we'll dive right into some of the policy issues. Last thing I'll say before we get started, there will be time for questions at the end. So if you're like, hey, what's Congress doing about X, Y, Z, or Y? You have some folks who probably actually know the answer to that. With that, Roland.
Yeah, well, thank you all for the opportunity, and thanks for joining us today. I always appreciate or welcome the opportunity to engage directly with industry. Roland Hernandez, I'm the staff director for the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity of the House Committee on Homeland Security, House of Representatives. We oversee CISA, but we also oversee certain cyber elements of other DHS components. In terms of my background, how I got to the Hill, it started back in 2017 when I was a junior in college. I had an opportunity to go to DC for a congressional internship. I ended up working for Congressman Michael McCall. He's a Republican from Texas. At the time, he was the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, and conveniently, he was working on legislation that would eventually become the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency the following year. I learned the legislative drafting process by looking at that bill and having it move from concept to a committee markup through being considered on the House floor under suspension, which was significant. It was eye-opening to me. I was expecting to go into finance after undergrad, and I just had a complete 180. I graduated, returned to DC, got a job in the Senate, working for the Senate Homeland Security Committee, where I was for 5 years, working for the chairman of the committee. And when we lost the Senate, I eventually worked for the minority for Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Senate Ranking Member Rob Portman of Ohio. I worked on a range of issues while I was on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. I worked on drones, CUAS, artificial intelligence. I oversaw the Transportation and Security Administration and DHS's Office of Intelligence and Analysis. After Senator Portman retired, I jumped over to the House side, where I worked for the House Committee on Homeland Security, where I've been for the past 3 years. I've worked on a range of subcommittees, from our Counterterrorism and Intelligence Subcommittee to our Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee to where I am now with the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection.
Thanks, Roland. Moira?
Yep, my name is Moira Bergin. I am Roland's counterpart on the House Democrats Homeland Security Committee. I work for Benny Thompson and Eric Swalwell predominantly, but I work for all the members of the committee. I am going to feel very old when I tell you about how I got to Congress. I started my internship in 2002 and have been on the Hill off and on ever since. I started working for Congresswoman Slaughter, my hometown member from upstate New York. I worked for her for 4 years, was like, I'm done with the Hill, I'm going to law school. Went to law school, clerked for a judge, and was like, I'm never gonna be done with the Hill. And 15 years later, here I am still, working on the Hill, because it's a job you just can't quit. I have had the opportunity to work in the emergency management space, which is where I started when I started on the committee in 2011. It actually has, despite its focus on more physical consequences of attacks or natural events. It has a lot of overlap with cyber in an interesting way in terms of how you plan relationship building, information sharing. So a lot of the kind of the philosophies that I thought and learned a lot about in the emergency management space translated really nicely to the cybersecurity space. I've been in this portfolio since 2017. I've had the opportunity to do a ton of interesting things. We've done election security work. We've done work on operational technology and critical infrastructure. We helped set up CISA, and we're watching CISA go through its more recent set of transitions, which I'm sure we'll get into more as the conversation continues. And as you might imagine, I have strong opinions about them that I'm happy to share with all of you. But I will cut myself off and turn it over to Graham.
Thank you guys for having me. My name is Graham Harwood. I have a bit of an unusual journey to the Hill. I spent 6.5 to 7 years as a software engineer and quantitative developer and then a systems reliability engineer, mostly at trading firms and banks. The thing is, at some point during that process, I realized that most people's passions are like surfing or video games, which kind of 1 in a million to make that your career. Mine was like reading the news and figuring out how to make a decision on it. So I was like, that's not 1 in a million. Let's go back, get a new degree, and try again. My first class of grad school was taught by a Congressman Mike Quigley. And I was like, okay, can I come work for the Intelligence Committee? He said, do you have a security clearance? I did not. I said, okay, can I come work for you? And so I realized, watching people do that, basically your job is to, somebody sends you and says, hey, come sign on to my bill. You read the bill and say, yes, no, you tell your boss, like, yes or no. And they have, personal offices have very small staffs. Your congressman might have 4 people to cover everything from healthcare, education, national security, technology, the whole waterfront. After grad school, my grad school gave me a stipend to go work in public service. I worked for them for 3 months on a $2,500 total stipend, and then eventually they found a budget to keep me on full time. Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is a bit of a strange committee. Our legislative jurisdiction is very small. It is the federal workforce, the federal IT, like the post office, and like some other kind of random things. But our investigative jurisdiction is what really people care about because we're the principal investigative committee of Congress, and it can be summed up in 4 words, which are any topic, any time. Which really adds, to be clear, that is actually in the House rules. It is any topic, any time, but it adds a certain element, and I cover, as I said, national security, foreign policy, econ, tax, trade, and financial services. So it's a wide range.
Thank you all. As you can tell, right, it's like there is not a lot of folks on the Hill. If you noticed how broad some of the portfolios that people are talking about, one of the things that always impressed me was how much I was outnumbered by the executive branch in anything that I would go into, where I'd be like, oh, you have like 7 people focused on Congress, just on Congress for each one of us, in addition to all of the people who are backstopping them and doing support staff. But it is a great place to get a sense of what's going on and help steer the direction of the country, and that's where we're going to go first. One of the things that you learn quickly in working in Congress is there's a lot that's reactive. Graham touched on that as, if you're addicted to the news of the day, Congress is a good place because whether you want to or not, this is something that's going to come up. Your members are going to get asked about it, whether it's off the House floor or whether it's back when they're back at home grocery shopping. So we're going to start on some topical areas of consideration. And Roland, I'd like to start with you because the president released a new cybersecurity strategy for America 3 weeks ago. And I know that's something, as well as an executive order focused on cybercrime and fraud. I know it's something that your members are interested in, and I'd love to hear kind of how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, so we were happy to see the strategy finally released. We'd been hearing that it was going to be released going back to November. We've been hearing differing opinions about the size and the scope. It's 4 pages total, not counting the cover page, the president's letter, and the back page. We get that. From my view, it's viewed as a high-level strategic framework with clear priority areas. And I think from our members' view and from my view as the staff director of the Cyber Subcommittee, we look at the outcomes. We're fully expecting there to be follow-on activity in the form of executive orders. Then we're looking at an implementation plan, which I suspect is forthcoming. Can't say when. I don't work for ONCD or the NSC, but my expectation is that we will have some follow-up activity to help support and drive the implementation of the pillars. Second point is the actual pillars themselves. With the exception of the first pillar, shaping adversary behavior, I think most of us in this room agree that the other 5 pillars, we're all on the same page. We support them. Things like securing our critical infrastructure, staying ahead of our adversaries and emerging technologies. So that's how we're viewing it. As it relates to the executive order that accompanied the National Cyber Strategy, we're exploring the potential of a hearing to help complement some of the work that the admin's going to be doing in this space. Whether it's cybercrime, fraud, or predatory schemes that are targeting our most vulnerable populations, whether they're older individuals or those from low-income backgrounds. These are growing issues that we want to tackle. The chairman of our committee is also on the Financial Services Committee, so is the subcommittee chairman of the Cyber Subcommittee. So that overlap helps drive their interest in that executive order. So that's something we're going to be exploring in the months ahead.
Thanks, Moira. I know that your members also have perspectives on the strategy, so would love to hear how you're thinking about it and thinking about implementation going forward, something Roland raised as well.
Mm-hmm. They do. So I think we were surprised by the length of the strategy. I think it's something that if a Democratic administration had churned out what really is, I would say, a 3-page strategy, if you actually get down to the substance of what is being planned, would have been ridiculed roundly. And I understand that there might have been some lower expectations for what would come out of this administration, but I don't think this cut the mustard. I think this document would have been useful and valuable in year 1 and understandable to come out, given that it is very high level. But coming out in year 2, I think is disappointing on a number of levels. First, it doesn't assign roles and responsibilities to any agencies. It doesn't give us anything to legislate towards. It doesn't give appropriators anything to budget towards. And that's what we're looking for in a strategy. I do think cybersecurity, despite how polarized things are these days, I continue to believe that cybersecurity is an area in which we can find bipartisan agreement and move forward in a productive bipartisan way. I would point out that the reactions on our side to the strategy might have been a little bit more muted had there been any engagement at all with Democrats as the strategy was rolling out. As it is, I found out, I think it was on Twitter or somebody emailed me on a Friday afternoon saying, hey, the strategy's out, have you seen it? Everybody in town saw the strategy, like the private sector, and I'm glad they engaged with the private sector. They should. But they didn't engage with Congress. At least they didn't engage with Democrats. In contrast, the previous administration had a really robust rollout of their cyber strategy. They let us know a day ahead of time. We all saw it ahead of time. They had a congressional call where they answered questions about what was going to be happening next, what their plans were, what their goals and to clarify their goals and objectives. And I would also point out that they're not here to explain it. I think everyone has said there should be additional meat on the bones of this strategy. I think I can imagine no place better to get input on what those meat on the bones should look like than coming to RSA and tapping into the expertise that's out here, but they're not here to get that advice or to explain what they meant. What we're left with is a series of high-level, we will do blank statements without any explanation about how we will do blank. You have a lot of vague aspirations, but it invites a lot of interpretation. So even if you talk about its more forward-leaning use of offensive cyber capabilities, which is something that I think there's an appetite to discuss, it doesn't really explain what we mean by that. And I think that's an important thing to clarify, both for purposes of domestic policy, but also for our allies, so they have an understanding of what we mean by being more assertive with our use of offensive tools. So I think it creates more questions than it answers. We look forward to additional information about what the administration hopes to do. Like I said, we hope to be part of the conversation because cybersecurity remains a space where there is room for bipartisanship, and we should work hard to preserve that. We do not need cybersecurity to be a space where we have a knee-jerk reaction to have the opposite opinion of what the opposite party has proposed. It's too important a mission to have that become the default. So our hope is that ONCD will engage more, that CISA will engage more in the future. We're hopeful about the new leadership, and that we can have more productive conversations about what the plans are going forward.
Thanks, Moira. And one thing that I think, as I listen to that answer, that I would pull out and just foot stomp for all of you, right, is the idea that Congress and the executive branch have to work together to get things done, right? Like this is just foundational to your life working in Congress or in the executive branch is you derive, if you're working at the White House, if you're working at CISA, or you're working at the FBI, you're deriving the money that you use to get paid in the first place, your authorities from Congress. And then the flip side, if you're working in Congress and you're trying to set a very high strategic level, you need guidance from the operators, the folks who are on the ground. So that interplay between what's going on in the executive branch and what's going on in Congress is not necessarily something that's always intuitive, I think, to the outside. But I think that was a great way of sort of explaining how some of that looks in practice. Graham, when we turn to you, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. We're at RSA. It's impossible to be at RSA the past couple of years and not say AI. So we're going to say AI and say, hey, there's been a lot of going on with AI in the federal government in the past month, I would say. You all may have read about it. How are your members thinking about this? You have responsibility, as you mentioned, in addition to the anytime, any topic, for federal IT in particular. How is that? How are you thinking about what's going on right now in the AI space with the feds?
So we're thinking about a lot of things because the whole benefit of the any topic, any time is we could cross every agency. So whether it's DoD or HHS or any other part of the government, we are looking at how they're using different tools, and it's across the federal IT kind of entire landscape. And one of the big things that we have to do is thinking. I was at a talk recently with somebody from DoD. And they're talking about how we are onboarding AI faster than ever before. It's going great. It is wonderful. 2 sentences later, they said, and SolarWinds was a real tragedy. We should make sure that never happens again. And the problem is those 2 statements are kind of inherently in conflict. Because I'm sure any of you guys who's ever worked in the federal government has heard of FedRAMP or the DoD version, CMMC. Those programs are very important to say, okay, if we're going to onboard something, we need to make sure that onboarding something at the Social Security Administration means it has every single taxpayer's data, all of their personal information. And anybody who remembers SolarWinds knows that if you can get into part of the supply chain, you can get into the agency. And so we put in place stuff like the FedRAMP process to make sure that we have sufficient confidence in every piece of technology the federal government uses to watch your privacy. And I'm coming from the private sector where it took us 9 months to onboard something that we critically needed because we had to get enough audits. And what our members are generally worried about is we want the efficiency, the service delivery. We want the American people to be able to interact with their government and get all of the services that they need, that their taxes have paid for. But we also need to do that in a way that is secure. And so, I get a lot of complaints about, or queries from industry about how we can make FedRAMP better. And I think there are definitely areas where we can work on reforms. But when it comes to adopting AI, adopting, kind of cloud services, whatever it is, our members are mostly worried about how do we do this in a to be very blunt about it, how do you do this in a way that minimizes body counts? Because there is very little that we do in the federal government that doesn't involve people's life safety, health, families, all those kind of things. So every single time it's coming up with a framework that says, we want to adopt your technology, but for example, if you're going to have a company came in and said, it took us $4 million in 2 years to get through the FedRAMP process. And I looked at them and said, you have a robot that you want to run through classified areas that has a Wi-Fi radio, a microphone, and a camera. We are going to take that apart and put it back together to make sure that it is not breakable. And so that's really, and then if we're going to adopt AI, it's kind of the same problem. So that is kind of where our members are, is like we want adoption, we want technology, we want service delivery, but that also comes with a lot of risk that we want to work with the community to make sure that we are adopting correctly.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful perspective. One of the things that you quickly learn in government, right, is that there is no alternative. Failure is not an option, and that risk calculus is just, when you think about in business, right, and you look at the history of business in this country as we celebrate our 250th anniversary, the businesses that were prominent in 1776 are not the businesses that are prominent today, but the government is the same. And that's great, right? I am a red-blooded, patriotic American. I love this country. I'm very glad to be living here. But that's also because the risk tolerance of government looks a lot different than the risk tolerance of industry. And that perspective is something that I think I'd encourage everyone to think about what happens when your risk tolerance is really, really small, even as we talk about emerging technologies, and balancing that risk is often put on Congress's shoulders to say, how do we figure this out? One other perspective or topic from current events, I'm sure everyone here is tracking the ongoing military action in Iran. And I would love to hear anyone who wants to jump in on what perspectives you're hearing from your members, from the administration, on the cyber aspects of that conflict, particularly post the incident affecting Stryker a couple weeks ago from a pro-Iranian regime group.
Well, I would just say from our standpoint, I think our members are most concerned about whether or not CISA in particular is prepared to be a partner to critical infrastructure owners and operators, as well as state and local governments, if they in a heightened threat environment. We are concerned about the staffing reductions there of about 1,000. We were encouraged to see that they plan on hiring 300 more people yesterday, but that I think will be difficult to do given how they've treated the workforce recently. But having said that, I think that's where our members' concern is. I would also flag that even during the first Trump administration, when there were periods of heightened tension with Iran or any state actor, there was a more systematic outreach to Congress about what the administration was doing proactively to protect critical infrastructure and to engage with critical infrastructure owners and operators, and there has been less of that this administration. I think that is something that our members would be interested in seeing return. And I think, once again, it's one of those, this is a bipartisan priority. It's not one of those, should we or should we not make sure we have clean drinking water, right? We're all pro that, and we want to keep Iran out of our water systems and critical infrastructure. So I think it's a shared goal, and I think we would like to have more proactive outreach.
I agree with what Moira just said. I know that we have a hearing tomorrow with new acting CISA Director, Nick Anderson, which we're looking forward to. I suspect that members will have questions for him about the ongoing operation in Iran. But beyond that, we're planning to have briefings for our members behind closed doors with DHS and potentially other departments like FBI, potentially. That's going to be on Thursday of this week. Beyond that, we know that the Trump administration provided briefings to both chambers of Congress. This was, I think, last week or the week before. So they have been briefed, but I agree that it would be good to have regular communication for them, because we know owners and operators of critical infrastructure, they own 90% of it here in the US. It's something that they're going to need support with if the Iranian cyber actors decide to target them in a systematic way.
Even just building off of that, there's a kind of a question that we would ask, oversight, again, government-wide. We're concerned about kind of the coordination that happened across everything. I have heard from, diplomatic security at state that they were not warned, which is why none of the diplomats were removed. Or, there's American citizens who were in all sorts of places that weren't coordinated on their removal. So I think that's something that's a real concern about both, again, investigative committee. I'm more of an investigator than really even working on legislation. So it's a lot of figuring out what happened, when, and why, and who is benefiting. And that's really something that my members are very concerned about. And then really kind of, hey, what was the plan here? And I know, if you're private industry, you need some sort of warning that like an advanced persistent threat actor might, tomorrow might be the day that they start. And so definitely a concern for government agencies and critical infrastructure. And our question is really, did we kind of do the rest of the things left of boom, and then boom happens, and are we suddenly scrambling to do them right at boom?
So we have talked a lot about the reactive part of being on the Hill, but Graham, I'll stick with you. What are some of the other projects that you're working on that are sort of longer term as you think about these are issues that the Oversight Committee has been looking at in the cybersecurity space?
So I would love to tell you it's working on a bunch of laws and stuff, but the last 14, 18 months have been mostly focused on kind of following around DOJ and discovering a lot of the more unusual choices they made at different agencies in the executive branch. I joke that I've had 2 careers and they were a little professionally offensive on both. Many of you are running cybersecurity businesses or technical businesses right now. If you were to invite, a 19-year-old consultant into your firm and they were to ask for sudo or full database read-write access at your firm, and then suddenly you saw your network layer that like 100 gigabytes of data were just shipped out, or like, why did this Docker container get sent to an IP address outside of my company? You go back and check, like, do we package our SSH keys in our Docker containers? And like, these are a lot of the questions I'm asking right now. I have relied on whistleblowers and DNS records and server logs. So it's kind of a red flag when you have a whistleblower who's like, hey, they're deleting the audit logs. And I just was trying to explain something like, that's never the right answer. I don't know that if any of you guys found out somebody at your company, I'd like, gone, sudo su, delete all the audit logs. I don't think that person would work at your company very long. And a lot of them have either taken permanent positions or left. And now some of them work at contractors, and we're trying to figure out how we re-secure an executive branch where, firewalls were set at star. And I don't really feel great about that. And the question is like, what do we do to both provide accountability to those people and also, in an environment when people weren't necessarily following the law, what's the next level of guardrail that we can do? And that's kind of the forward-looking aspect of that. So over the next whatever number of months and years, I think there's going to be an ongoing question of both looking back to see what happened and looking forward to see how we can rebuild and reimagine what like a federal IT infrastructure looks like that has resilience to insider threats and other kind of concerns that, but also like really serving the American people. Like a lot of people are not very well served by their government's technology. And like we know that, but like industry has the same COBOL problem that we do. I worked at a bank. We had a bunch of COBOL mainframes floating around. It's trying to modernize, but also figure out how we kind of re-secure.
So maybe on the more policy front, Roland, I think a lot of folks in this room are familiar with the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015, if only because it lets them do their jobs without lawyers in the room. No offense to lawyers in the room, but that was a core part when I was on the Hill. We were working on it in 2011 through 2015. Speaking of longer term projects, the law expired last year. It's been extended in a couple of fits and starts through September, but it's something that your boss, the chairman's been very interested in. Would love to hear kind of how you're thinking about that and where things stand.
Yeah, I wish I had more of an update to provide. So our chairman, he attended a McCrary Institute event a few months ago, and I'm going to emphasize some of the comments he made there, in that his priority is since 2015. The last thing we want is another lapse. My very first month as staff director of the subcommittee, we were in a government shutdown, and we had a lapse of the since 2015 authorities. I want to avoid that in September. I wish we had more progress with the Senate, as our chairman has mentioned in public comments before. It's going to require a compromise with our counterparts on Senate Homeland. Chairman Paul, they have different ideas about since 2015. He has his own version of the bill, which is combined with a Free Speech Act, which is related to CISA's MDM activity, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and government censorship. This is something that we have to be mindful of. There are members in our party who have different views of CISA, and we try to be proactive in how we approach those issues with them in terms of member education, meeting with their staff, trying to ensure that they understand that there are differences between CISA 2015, the bill, and CISA, the agency. So we're hoping to avoid that conflation. It's something we're still seeing to this day. But again, I wish I had more of an update to provide. It's his top priority. It's a priority for me. And his bill, in particular, WMWIG, is something that we're hoping to see some traction with towards September.
Moira, I know there's a lot on your plate as well, so maybe we'll start with 3 letters, CVE, something that is basically meaningless if you say those letters together in Washington, D.C., but everyone in this room knows. So why is the committee taking an interest in this topic?
Well, mostly we were just looking for a kitchen table issue for our members to go home and say they worked on. Well, as we all are aware, last year there was a bit of a fire drill with the CVE program almost lapsing. So my colleague, Alan McQuinn, who's wonderful, you should all know him, on the Science Committee, and I have been working to prevent that from happening again. And so initially we drafted some legislation just to put the CVE program on the right track, figured it would be like a light lift, just lock it in. And as we began to do that, we heard from a lot of experts and people who rely on the program that in fact there are a number of problems that they would like to address in the program in an authorization, which would not be the first time that I thought we were authorizing something that would be a light lift, and then you kick a hornet's nest and it blows up in your face. And it takes a lot longer to do than you initially anticipated. But through the process, we have learned about some real issues that could be, or opportunities for improvement in the program, I will put it that way. And our goal with the program is to make sure that CISA is responsible and on the hook to facilitate the program, that it has something to budget toward, and that its international partners have more input and more skin in the game into how the program works. We want to avoid having multiple CVE catalogs internationally. That's not good for the network defenders. We want to make sure people are using the same terminology, et cetera, when they're talking about CVEs, so we don't create a bunch of confusion about who's talking about what. Something that has come up more recently is how do we account for AI, and is CVE an appropriate, was that me? Sorry, is this current CVE program a good fit for AI vulnerabilities? We don't know the answer to that. If you all have input, we're happy to take it. You can find my email address pretty easily. Anyway, so our goal is to stabilize the program, improve it, put it on a track to modernize, making sure that the technology that supports the program, the interface is all workable. And so understanding that it is foundational to a lot of the work that you all do, we want to make sure that it works for you. So we've engaged with a lot of people, gotten a lot of feedback. If you all have not seen it and want to see it, just reach out to me. Or Nick can also connect you. You can get his email address easily too.
One part of that, right, that I'll just highlight again, right? The engagement is critical to the work of any staffer.
Oh yeah, can I just engage? Can I just?
Yes.
Okay, real briefly. So CVE program is just sort of keep it on, right? Like just the contract gets renewed, we assume it's going fine because we don't hear anything. I think you're about to say this, but I'm just gonna jump in. We don't know there's a fire unless you tell us. I think a lot of times people assume that Congress knows things, but for my team, there's 2 people that oversee CISA for my team, and I'm one of them. So there's a lot for us to know, and when an agency comes into brief, on either administration, they want to tell you a good news story. So they're going to tell you everything's fine, nothing to see here. So if there are problems with something that any agency is doing, please do feel good to alert Congress to it, because we don't always know ourselves, because the agencies aren't always forthcoming, and unless someone tells us there's a problem, we don't know there's a problem. And that's another reason why we started to solve the problem. We started to do legislation, and they were like, oh, there's more problems you could fix. And here we are.
I'll put the more positive spin on that too, though, which is also lift up programs that are working well. Because if you're getting briefs from an agency and they're saying everything is hunky-dory and that's the baseline and that's what you hear every time, having outside folks come in and say, this is really working well, this is something the government is doing well, is great, because it helps us have some validation as to what's going on. And that input is both, the unsolicited, hey, tell us that there's a fire, but it's also, you're seeking comments on the bill as you draft it. And again, I think that's sometimes underappreciated by folks outside of DC, is how much back and forth there is with stakeholders. And Roland, would love to sort of hear your perspectives on this too. Something that the committee's been doing recently, I know, is holding roundtables with folks from industry, other outside experts on topics ranging from North Korean IT workers, AI. Would love to hear some of what you're hoping to get out of that, what your members have been doing.
Yeah, so in December, we had a hearing with Anthropic, Google Cloud, and Quantum Exchange, as well as Seven Hill Ventures. And we originally requested the CEOs, but we reached a compromise where we had an agreement that they would provide us with senior level executive C-suite at a later date in the form of roundtables or closed-door briefings in order to facilitate more candid conversation between members and industry. So last week, we had our first roundtable in our AI National Security Roundtable series, featuring Jack Clark, the co-founder of Anthropic, as well as Darktrace Federal CEO, the US subsidiary to Darktrace. And it was a really good conversation. I think members on both sides enjoyed the closed-door format. It allowed for more candid conversation. And we intentionally made it AI National Security broadly. So we have a number of members who sit on other committees, like the Financial Services Committee, Foreign Affairs, given their export control work, and other committees that overlap with AI and national security. So we're planning to have at least 2 more that I know of in April and in May, featuring senior executives from other leading companies, whether it's AI Frontier Labs or leading AI cyber security companies, but also other companies who might be interested. We've had outreach from a number of industry stakeholders expressing their interest in participating in a panel. So we're looking forward to that, and I know it's something our members appreciate. Separately, we recently had a North Korean remote IT worker roundtable where we brought in, again, leading companies from the AI and cyber industries to just discuss and provide our members with the direct insight that they have with regard to the threat landscape, what they're seeing, what we should be paying attention to. And it was a useful, again, format in a closed-door session where we could have just open conversations without worrying about something being said that members didn't want off or quoted publicly. So I think it's worked for us so far in that format, and we're looking forward to continuing to have these roundtables.
Right. I think if you look at perspectives from having staff is, how much of this you've seen in headlines, some fraction of it, but there's a lot that goes on that isn't either televised directly or that's happening at a staff level. And this is a great example of something where it's like you're not going to go and find, oh, here's the public hearing and here's what happens. And there is a ton of stuff that happens at the Capitol every day that you don't necessarily intuit from watching just the 5% of it that's televised and that gets written up a lot. We have about 5 minutes left before we go into questions. So if you've got questions, start thinking of them. We are going to have a lightning round, but the first lightning round question, Moira, I'm just going to say 3 things quick, and your quick perspectives on CIRCIA, JCDC, and the CISA posture review.
Okay. CIRCIA, obviously, Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act was due out last fall, still not done. Didn't like the proposed rule, didn't align with went beyond what Congress intended. We're hoping that CISA would engage with the private sector to get the rule right earlier than it has. We were encouraged to see that they had announced the town halls last month. Unfortunately, they set a due date for themselves at the end of May. They're, of course, going to blow past it. The administration has said that regulatory harmonization is a priority of theirs. CIRCIA is a good pathway to some regulatory harmonization if they can harmonize disparate incident reporting requirements. So it's in their interest and aligns with their goals to get a rule done. We hope that CISA figures out a viable ex parte process so that they can get the feedback that they need to make the final rule valuable and the information they get from it valuable, along with investing in the technology that they will need to analyze the information that comes in and make it more actionable to the end users. The 2 goals of the program of the act were to detect and remediate cyber threats earlier and campaigns earlier, and to understand the trends and what adversaries were doing. And they're going to need to be able to process information quickly to do that. So that's CIRCIA. JCDC. Last Congress, Mr. Swalwell authored legislation to authorize JCDC. That continues to be a priority. Our view is that in the last administration, JCDC had a lot of promise, but it grew too quickly. Our goal is to not kick anybody out of JCDC, but to understand who's there, how they get there, and what role they're going to play in the organization. And are there opportunities to create a core group of members that have high visibility and a unique visibility into activity, particularly malicious activity on critical infrastructure networks, that could be of high value to the government, and to coordinate on understanding what's happening on critical infrastructure networks more productively and in a trusted environment. What we have heard is that the JCDC got so big that there was a trust gap, and we want to restore the trust of that environment. The other piece that we're looking at is an in-person component. CISA used to have an NKIC floor. It's no longer in use, but we heard that had value, and is there a way to repurpose that? Force structure review. As we know, we lost 1/3 of CISA's workforce over the past year. We have a limited understanding of how that impacted programs and activities across the agency. There was a bipartisan agreement at the beginning of the Biden administration that CISA was understaffed to carry out its mission. It's hard to understand how anyone could agree that with 1,000 fewer people, it has the staff it needs to carry out its mission now. We are considering legislation to authorize a force structure review, very similar to what we did in the FY21 NDAA, which was a Solarium Commission recommendation. A lot has changed since 2021. The CISA's mission has changed. Do they have the right people to do the job? I have more to say on that, but in the interest of time, I will leave it at that.
All right, now we're going to do the real lightning round. So 30 seconds each from the panelists. We're just going to compress this and then jump to Q&A, so start lining up, which is, I'm going to ask each of you in turn, and again, 30 seconds, please. What's the biggest misconception that folks have about Congress, and what's the best way to engage? And we'll start with Graham.
The biggest thing to remember about Congress is they're all just people, and they really need your help. Your member of Congress will have somewhere between 3 to 5 total policy staff to cover, as I said, the entire waterfront. And so they are, trying to learn as much as they can, but they come from a wide variety of different backgrounds, and they, are relying on all different people's expertise to deal with the very complicated world that we have today. The easiest way to get in touch with your member of Congress is that every American person has a easy way, like a superpower they don't realize, which is call your member of Congress. They will listen to whatever legislative ideas you have, but they'll also help you get your passport expedited or your tax refund if it's lost. So call your member of Congress. They want to help you. You can look it up by your zip code.
Moira.
Okay, so I'll just return to what I said earlier. I think the misconception about Congress is that we already know everything. We do not already know everything. We will deceive you into thinking that we do, but we do not. So if you have information for us, please feel free to share it. I agree with Graham that calling your member of Congress is a good way, but also engaging with organizations that already have established relationships with Congress can be useful too, because then we know that we're not just getting some random person spamming us with malware and I sent you these attachments, just open them. That going through a trusted source is also not a terrible idea if you can manage that.
Roland.
And for me, it's engagement doesn't matter unless you're a major player in your space. In organizing the roundtables, I've noticed our engagement with smaller startups and smaller companies, they just assume that their opinion doesn't matter the same way that it would if you're a Microsoft or a Google, and it does. If you're close to a problem, you've identified a solution, and you want to bring it to Congress, we're all ears. We're willing to have that conversation with you to work through what a solution could look like in the form of legislation or a policy response.
All right, let's jump into questions. If you can just quickly identify yourself, keep it short, and end with a question mark, please.
I'll do my best. But I'll also add just a thank you for being here with the disappointing federal pullback from attending RSA. It's great to see you all. Thank you for being with us. My name is Terry Loftus. I serve at K-12 Education, and I also have the honor and privilege of serving as the chairperson for the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. You might be familiar. I was the one that got the letter from then Secretary Noem saying the rescission of funding. Over 20 years, one of the most effective and efficient public-private partnerships. We had nearly 20,000 SLTT members. I guess my question today is, when we think about, I hear all the time of people thinking about, rural towns and small wastewater facilities and hospitals and K-12 and tribal communities, and that's important. But all of that went away. We switched to a membership model, trying to accommodate everyone. But again, the most needy, the most under-resourced, the most impacted by all of these events, including nation-state events that we see, educational accounts like the Moornet attack a couple weeks ago in Missouri. Like, we are impacted by all of these things. And to have a program that was ranging between $25 and $30 million a year, which is literally budget dust, go away. And then the rollback of CISA, we have, in our areas, we've seen turnovers, no CSAs to reach out to. And then, of course, we, under Secretary Cardona, Department of Ed, we're seeing an escalation of help and resources, and obviously the Department of Ed has been decimated. So I guess, is there ever a space or a place where something like the funding could be reconsidered by the CISA? We'd always talk to folks, you're right, it is a bipartisan issue, but now people are afraid to, especially on the right, to talk to us because anything that was related to CISA in any way is somehow toxic now. So that's a lot, but thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate the question. I have a lot of hope for Nick Anderson. Again, he's appearing before our committee tomorrow. I respect Nick Anderson. He's very articulate, very smart. He knows this issue well, and I think he's well respected within the cyber community. But again, we need confirmed leadership with CISA so we can have these conversations about these issues at that level. It's important to the chairman, both our full committee chairman and our subcommittee chairman, and I'm hopeful that we can work with you all to find solutions with confirmed Senate leadership.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I think that, we are currently, like, as Moira has said, we passed a lot of laws that should help you. We passed a lot of funding that should help you. There's a lot, like, a while ago, and then it got pulled back. And then just like OMB hasn't sent it out, or the grant programs got canceled, or DOE, as you said, has been decimated. We lack the people at CISA. For years, people have been talking about how we need, technical people in the government and people who come do public service, and we fired them all. So I would love to say that, like, it's coming soon, but I have no guarantees for you other than, like, we would like to build all these things back again because they are critical, and that is how we support state, local, tribal governments. We're not necessarily saying we put things back exactly the way they were. Like, in my most optimistic days, I'll say, well, this is an opportunity to rethink the best way to do it. But I don't have, there's no reason that like, you're doing critical work, and the federal government should absolutely be supporting you.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick. Democrats on our committee have always supported MSISAC. We continue to. We support it with our appropriators. I would just say maybe some an optimistic spin is sometimes when you lose something, it highlights the gap that it creates when you lose it. And then it creates more advocacy to get it restored, and that can be effective. And I don't think we need confirmed leadership at CISA before that happens. I think you can begin that advocacy now, and you can articulate the loss of capability that went away with the support for MSISAC funding. So that's how I would think about it, and that would be my strategy.
We've been doing that. We'll keep doing it.
Yeah. Thank you for doing it. We talk to your people a lot.
Hi, thank you all for being here, as Terry said. My name is Netta Squires, former Director of Local Cybersecurity for the state of Maryland. Had the great pleasure of working with Terry on the MSISAC Executive Committee as well. I have a question. What are you thinking about the Pillar Act? First of all, do you think it's going to pass the Senate? And also, how are you thinking about funding it so that it is a meaningful funding and not just check the box?
Yeah, so the Pillar Act is something that our subcommittee chairman introduced, and it's passed out of our committee. It passed out of the House floor. They're starting to have, or not starting, they're continuing to have conversations with our Senate counterparts. I don't have an update to provide as of yet, but I'm hopeful that we can reach some kind of conclusion or compromise with our counterparts. We have good partners in Senator Peters, Senator Rounds, and others on the Senate side. So those conversations are happening just above my level at this point. And in terms of funding, we have been engaging at a staff level with our appropriations counterparts. We just had a recent conversation this past Friday about it. I don't have an update to provide, unfortunately, but it's something that we're continuing to engage on.
I would just add to that, I think we had a really productive hearing on this subject last year. We heard a lot of really concrete, good news stories about how the grant program has reduced risk to state and local governments, how they've really built partnerships across states to better deliver security services. And so I think that kind of information is really compelling to members when you're asking them for more money in a kind of austere budget environment. I think Democrats would probably see some opportunities to reprogram certain funds under different circumstances than we're living in right now, but maybe next year we'll have better luck.
All right, we have 6 seconds left. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our panelists, and know that Congress is filled with people, good people who are trying to do the right thing, and that they want to hear from you. Thanks very much.